is silent, save for the faint creak of the floorboards beneath your feet and the distant hum of the wind rattling against the window pane. Imagine this. It's late at night, and the world around you feels unnervingly still. The kind of stillness that doesn't bring peace, but rather a creeping unease, as if the darkness itself is alive and watching. Have you ever had that feeling? The one where the air feels heavier, like something unseen is lurking just out of sight, a shadow that moves when you're sure nothing's there, a whisper you can't quite catch. That's where our story begins tonight. But before we dive in, let me ask you, when was the last time you truly felt alone? Are you alone now? You might think you're safe, cocooned in the familiarity of your room, with the soft glow of your screen as your only companion. But safety is a fragile illusion, isn't it? It's only a matter of perception. The walls that cradle you, the locks you trust, the lights you depend on to banish the darkness, all of it can fail. And in that failure, something ancient, something patient, waits. Now stay with me as we journey into the unknown, where comfort dissolves into dread, and the boundaries between reality and nightmare blur. But be warned, once you enter, there's no turning back. It began on a night much like this one. The clock had just struck 2 a.m. when Emma first noticed it, the sound, a faint tapping, rhythmic, yet inconsistent, coming from somewhere in the house. At first she brushed it off. Houses make noises, don't they? Pipes settle, wood contracts, the wind plays tricks on your ears. But this was different. It wasn't random, and it wasn't mechanical. It had a cadence, almost like footsteps. Emma lay still in her bed, clutching the edge of her blanket, listening. Her heart thumped loudly in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears as the tapping continued, growing louder and closer. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the neighbors. Maybe it was a branch brushing against the house. But deep down, she knew better. This sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just a tale to send chills down your spine. It's a warning, a reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters under your bed or the ghosts in your closet. Sometimes they're the things you invite in without even realizing it. Emma's story is one of those. She didn't believe in the supernatural. She didn't believe in the power of the unknown. But belief doesn't matter to the things that dwell in the shadows. Emma's belief is out. They believe in you. That night, as Emma's courage finally gave way, she rose from her bed. Her feet felt like lead as she stepped onto the cold wooden floor. She followed the sound, each step bringing her closer to the source. Down the hallway, past the flickering light bulb that hadn't been replaced in weeks, to the door of the basement. It was ajar, just slightly, and the tapping had stopped. Silence hung heavy in the air, thick with anticipation. As she reached for the door, a sudden chill washed over her. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and her hand trembled as she pushed it open. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the faint glow from the hallway. She fumbled for the light switch, but it didn't work. Of course it didn't work. Her phone flashlight barely pierced the void, as she descended the stairs, each creak of the steps sounding like a gunshot in the quiet. And then she saw it. At the bottom of the stairs, a figure stood motionless, its outline barely visible in the dim light. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its proportions were wrong, its limbs too long, its posture unnaturally rigid. But the worst part was its face, or rather, the lack of one. A smooth, featureless expanse where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. And yet, she knew it was looking at her. Emma froze, her instincts screaming at her to run, but her legs refused to move. The figure tilted its head as if curious, and then it took a step forward. The sound of its foot hitting the floor broke the spell, and Emma turned and bolted up the stairs. She slammed the basement door shut and locked it, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the key. She pressed her ear to the door, listening. Nothing. Just silence. But silence doesn't mean safety, and in Emma's case, it meant something far worse. For the rest of that night, and every night that followed, the tapping never stopped. It moved through the house, always just out of sight. And Emma, well, she's still there, still listening, still waiting for the day it decides to stop lurking in the shadows and finally step into the light. Weeks turned into months, and Emma's life unraveled. She stopped going to work, stopped answering calls, stopped pretending everything was fine. Her friends tried to visit, but she always found an excuse to keep them away. She knew they wouldn't believe her. How could they? Even she doubted her sanity at times. But the tapping never lied. It followed her everywhere she went. In the house, relentless, mocking. One night, desperate for answers, Emma decided to record it. She set up her phone in the hallway and pressed record before retreating to her bedroom. The tapping began, as it always did, faint and distant, growing louder and closer with each passing minute. When it finally stopped, Emma hesitated, then gathered the courage to retrieve her phone. Her hands trembled as she played back the video. At first, there was nothing unusual, just the tapping echoing in the silent house. But then, something changed. The camera's angle, fixed and unbroken, began to shift slightly, as if someone or something was moving it. A shadow passed in front of the lens, too fast and indistinct to identify. And then, the whispering began. Low, guttural, and unintelligible, but unmistakably there. Emma dropped the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't sleep that night, or any night after. The recordings continued, each one more disturbing than the last. Shadows moved where there should be none. Whispered words formed phrases she didn't want to understand. And the figure, it began to appear more frequently, not just in the basement, but everywhere. In the corner of her bedroom, at the end of the hallway, reflected in the bathroom mirror. The final straw came one night when Emma woke to find it standing at the foot of her bed, its faceless head tilted, its elongated fingers reaching toward her. She screamed, and the figure vanished, leaving only the oppressive silence and the faint echo of her own terror. Emma knew then that it wouldn't stop. It would never stop. She tried to leave, packing her belongings in a frenzy, but as she reached the front door, She felt it, a presence behind her. The air grew cold, and the familiar tapping began again, louder than ever, reverberating through the walls. Emma turned slowly, tears streaming down her face, to see the figure standing inches away. It raised a hand, and everything went black. To this day, the house remains empty, its windows dark, its doors locked. Neighbors speak of strange noises at night, tapping, whispers, faint cries for help. But no one dares to enter. And Emma, well, no one's seen her since. Perhaps she's still there, trapped in the shadows, waiting for the next unwitting soul to step inside. So, if you ever hear tapping in the dead of night, don't follow it. Don't investigate, because some doors once opened can never be closed.